So let's take a look here at it from another view with a whole sword. And I want to put some more focus here on that ram skull. I feel like it's still too empty looking in some parts. So let me find a good angle here on it, and especially here where it's intersecting with the other subtool. I want to take our trim brush and I'm just gonna toggle in between ghost mode and the other mode because sometimes it's hard to see where we are at here. And I want to add some extra C subline here in support to make that look more connected there. Like I was saying, it's useful to toggle that on and off, the ghost mode, because as nice as this is with the ghost mode, I sometimes find it hard to really tell exactly where is it transitioning. Where is the transition in between those tools? And it's not always that easy, which is why it's good to toggle. So let's have another line here in support of these eye sockets. I'm gonna have it pretty much connecting here with this line that we were having under the eye socket here. And it was kind of just there and we didn't really do anything with it. So now we have it connected. And I want to have another line here of C sub also going here into these eye sockets. And then following it along here on the sides. And then find a different angle here and connect it further with our C sub. And then let's see with our ghost mode here. And have another line here pretty much under the eyeballs. Well, we don't really have eyeballs, I mean the eye socket. And then have another line here. And I'm gonna connect it over here. So now that we have this line, I wanna also have a Z add here in support of that. And let's also have some Z add here leading up to the inner eye socket. Let me just smooth that and then carry on here. Find a different angle and then also connect it up here. Let me just undo that and try again. Still not perfect. Third time is the charm. I find that very often. So now more C sub here on the top to connect these junctions, these intersections, and then here some more Z add also along that new line that we were working on. And let me also find an angle here from the bottom where we look into the inside pretty much and have some extra Z add there. Let's see what we can do next here on that. And Z add is always a good idea. It doesn't always have to be that every line gets a Z add, but especially here on such a big surface like that ram hat, on the most dominant lines I like to support it with some extra Z add. So let me add a C sub detail in here. Just gonna have 3 strokes, zoom in there, and then have one of these filler details. And it looks a little pixelated, but don't worry, it's gonna be okay once we bake the normal map. Sometimes you're zoomed in super close here at ZBrush and you think like, oh my god, this is looking pixelated, but worry not. Once we bake that out, even a 4K resolution, it's perfectly fine. So let's have a look at it here from our top view. And I want to have another line here of C sub in support of the lines that we already have to make that more interesting looking there. And I'm gonna have also Z add here following along that, connecting it there to the back. And then once again, let's zoom out and take a look at it here with our full composition. And I feel like this part here at the front, the nose, is still a bit empty. So I'm gonna have some extra work on that here. Have some C subline here along this detail that we already have there. And then also along this region here. Let's make that more interesting here with some additional lines. And then connect it here. And also it's still quite empty looking here on that part. So let's have some more work on that here. And I'm gonna have another C subline here following along these lines that we were doing there with a bit of a curve here to the left and then to the right. Well, depending from which side you look at it. And have this here also better connected with another Z sub. Was too soft looking there before. And let's take a look at it here from this perspective and follow this here with also another line. Remember, we can always make use of the Shift key to make a straight line, such as here in that case. And overall that already looks better there now as it was before, which was too empty. So let's see where we can strike next. Let's have a look at it here from the side, and I'm gonna put it into our isolation view. And I'm gonna have Z sub and Z add here as an extra detail under the eye sockets to make that look more connected there with the other subtool. And I want to also have another line here following along pretty much where these eye sockets end on the right side, and then connect it over there where we have these horns. And also have a Z add line here in support of that. And I think overall that already looks better now than what we had before. It was just too empty. But it might still benefit here from a few more extra lines, such as here, where we have this mouth looking thing. Let me make sure we have it properly connected there to the back. And also use our Z sub. Sorry, not Z sub, Z add to complement that. Let's get out of the solo view once more here to see the overall composition. And I want to go over here to these rings once more and add an extra line of Z sub here coming out of that. And then do the usual Z add line alongside of it. And that makes it also a bit more interesting there, this ring. So back here to that RAM skull, let's take it into isolation view. And let's have one of these details here with a Z sub and a Z add. Kind of following along here with the Z sub around it to make it more contrasty. And also have like an extra Z add line here following that around. Also here on the top. Let's take a look at it here from the top perspective. And let me just connect that a bit more here to the inside. Add a bit more Z sub and Z add there, where we have that, what you could call a nose. And also connect that here with a Z add line. And that looks still like it could need a bit more extra Z sub there to make it stand out where we have this detail. And once again, let's take a look at it here from a different angle and view. And let me just snap back in here from our top perspective. And let's get back to this detail that we have there behind our RAM skull. And let's also add an extra line of Z sub here at this part. And then also have some Z add information here. Let me take that into isolation view and add some extra Z subline here, which I think will look better as what we had before. Connect it some more over there, just with Z sub. And here also, let's have another Z subline to make that more contrasty. And then have another pair of Z add following along that. And also down here. And let's take a look here at that piece where we can have one of these tiny details with a simple Z add into that Z sub that we had there before. So overall, I'm pretty happy now with the details that we have here in the center of the sword and also in general. I want to go back here to our blade and do a bit more work here on that. So first of all, I want to be at the first subdivision level. Select our H polish brush. And now let's go over here and enable lazy mouse on that. And I want to have that down to 0.015, somewhere around there. And let's put the brush size to around 5. Zoom in here from the side view. And here on these regions where we don't have any Z subline, I'm going to use our Shift key here in order to press that a bit more together there where we have this sharp side of the sword. And you can see when I toggle it here in the undo history, it becomes quite obvious that it looks way sharper now as it was before. And obviously on a sword, we want to make it look really nice and sharp. So I'm going to do the same thing here. Press Shift to make that more sharp looking. Let's go back here in the undo history to see what it looks like. But remember to put it back to the current state. And I'm going to put it here to our third subdivision level, the highest. And then I think that was definitely helping it to make it look more sharp, and that will also benefit our normal map and texture later on. Let me just zoom in here, take our trim brush And right now the inside here, where we have it holed out, is quite empty. So I'm gonna have a C subline here. Let's find a different angle where we see basically everything and connect it over here to the other side. Take it a bit here to the outside pretty much, and then have another line coming out of it here like this. And then here let it follow around these lines that we already have and connect it there, which makes it more interesting looking and is certainly better than having nothing in there. I'm gonna have another C sub coming out of the one that we were just creating here, and then have it go all the way over here and connect it like this, so that it's not just one line there but actually two, and that makes it more interesting here. So let me just zoom in here once more and have yet another line here of Z sub. And then let's connect it here. Lots of small details that you might not even notice too much, but you might notice them after all, especially if you have it in the game, you know. Like, it's the small details, and the sum of them are what make the difference. I'm gonna have another C subline here on the inside. Take that all the way here to the back, and then let's find a different camera perspective and complete it here to the back. And I think we don't need to add Z add lines to that because it's so subtle there on the inside that you barely notice it to begin with, and we don't need to have it stand out here with our Z add lines. So I want to have another line here of C sub also coming out of this, and then connect it here to the line that we were originally doing when we were starting to work here on the high poly. And I'm going to have another line coming out of that here and connect it there. And then I also want to do some more work here at the front of the sword, which right now looks a bit empty to me. So let's also have brush size 1 here on our trim brush. I'm gonna have one of these details here. Let me just undo that and try again. So I'm gonna have 2 strokes here with C sub, and then have another Z add line on top of it, followed by more C sub around it. Kind of frame that detail there. And let me zoom back in here. What I want to do is have another C sub line. I'm gonna just use the shift key here to make it as straight as possible there, and then connect it there to the front. And let's have another C subline that comes out of this here. I will be using the shift key once again, and then bring the line up here to connect it to that other line that we just created. And this means we are done with the high poly modeling of our sword. So now we have all these different subtools here, which are a high poly model, and we have to export them out for 3D Max. But before we do that, I want to use Z-Remesher in order to get already a low poly version, which we then have to still clean up in 3D Max. This is gonna save us time, so we don't have to retopo everything from scratch. So as you know, we have all these different subtools here, such as these teeth and these horns and these leather straps, such as the ones here around the sword. And as you can see, that leather strap is actually hollowed out. So we want to have this as a separate object here as well. So what we're going to do then for these objects is that the ones that we want to have as individual elements, we're going to duplicate them. So let's take a look here at this leather strap, and I'm going to take it here into the polyframe mode. And there's something strange on these leather straps, which is that one of these bands doesn't have the same color. It's not one polygroup for some reason. And just to demonstrate you what that means, if I use Dynamesh on it, you don't have to follow that, just to show you. It means that when we use ZRemesher or Dynamesh, it only combines the same colors. So what we have to do, I'm gonna undo the Dynamesh. We have to go over here to polygroups, and I'm gonna say group visible. That way we have everything as one polygroup. And now we're gonna use Dynamesh before we use ZRemesher, and the reason is that these individual leather bands now all get merged as one object here. So if you look at it here in the polyframe view, you can see that everything is welded together. And now I'm gonna use ZRemesher. I'm gonna put it down to 1 where it says poly count. I'm gonna activate keep creases and then use ZRemesher on it. And you can see it's very nice topology here. I'm actually gonna undo it and put it all the way to 0.2 to have lesser polys. So now we have something nice here. I'm gonna undo it once more and try 0.1, basically all the way down. Let's see. And this looks great. This means we have basically already a low poly model here for this individual element. We still have to clean it up in 3D Max. But you can see here how it perfectly wraps over our high poly mesh. And as you can tell, this is gonna save us a lot of time. We don't have to do that from scratch. So before we export that, let's just also do the other parts where we need that, such as this sphere here. And we're basically going to repeat the process that we just did. We go over to Subtools, select the sphere. Well, we already have it selected. We duplicate it. Just gonna decrease the brush size, otherwise this is always in the way. This big selection for the brush. So let's go over here to Dynamesh then. And I'm just gonna say no there, it's gonna do it anyway. It just warns us that we have subdivision levels. And now I'm gonna smooth it out a bit here. Some of these parts. Just gonna smooth that with our symmetry on, which then makes it easier for ZRemesher to recognize where it's supposed to create our low poly around it. Let me just take a smaller brush and also smooth it out here at the back of the sphere, even though we barely see that, but that doesn't matter. Just the overall thing should be smooth for when we use our ZRemesher. Smooth that out a bit more here. So now this is our cloned sphere, the one that we duplicated. And now we can go back to our ZRemesher. I'm gonna leave it at 0.1. Keep creases, I wanna have that on. And now let's ZRemesh it. And that looks pretty good to me. Let's just get out of the isolation view. And now if we toggle that on and off here with our polyframe, you can see how it built this really nice low poly geometry, which once again means we don't have to create that later from scratch in 3D Max, and we can just do a bit of optimizing and cleaning up on it. So let's export this here. I'm gonna go over here to the export button. OBJ is fine, and I'm already having it here in the right folder, tutorial Sword Zbrush. I'm gonna call it sword_sphere_low, just so that we know what we're actually exporting. And then let's go back here to this leather band that we made. I want to select that. Let's make sure we have really this one selected, and then also go on export. And this one, I'm gonna give it the same name, only change the sphere for band. So that means we already have two of our subtools that we want to have individually in our low poly mesh, exported and ready for when we go to 3D Max. So now I'm gonna delete that actually, the low poly, because we don't need that anymore. We already exported it. I'm gonna delete this one here as well. Don't need that anymore, and I just want to keep this here as the high poly. The next pieces that I want to have are these teeth. So I'm going to duplicate them. And then let's go over here to our isolation view with the duplicated teeth. And in that case, I'm just going to go over here to subdivision level number 1, delete the higher one, and then I'm going to use Z-Remesher right away. We don't need to use Dynamesh. Activate Keep Creases, poly count 0.1, and let's take a look at it. Looks pretty good to me. So once again, these teeth here, I want to have them as separate objects. And I'm also going to export them here, sword_teeth, and save. So there we go, already 3 pieces that we can make use of. I'm also gonna delete that here. Don't need that anymore since we just exported it. And now we're gonna do the same thing here for these horns. So let's select it. And as before, we're gonna duplicate it. And now I'm gonna have this selection here. Press Shift and this button here to put it all the way to the bottom of our subtool bar, basically. So now I'm gonna also duplicate these rings on the horns and also have it all the way down. And now let's select the horn above it and merge down. Let's say OK to that. Okay, and now that means we have these things here combined, where before it was separate objects. And now we can use under geometry our Dynamesh on that. Let's have X and Y symmetry on. Let's make sure of that. And I'm gonna put it here to around 2000. And then press the Dynamesh button. Say no to that. It's gonna do it anyway. And here we have our Dynameshed version of the horns. And let's just see what Z-Remesher is doing with that. So I'm gonna have it at 0.1. Put Keep Creases on. Press Z-Remesher. And once again, we have a nice topology here. Very good edge flow. And essentially, that will also save us time. That means we don't have to do these horns here all the way from scratch once we do the low poly model in 3D Max in the next part of the tutorial. So I'm gonna have it also exported. Gonna call it sword horns_low and save it also as an OBJ. And now we can delete this clone that we made here. So we're just back here to our high poly. So now we exported everything that we want to have as individual objects once we do the retopo. And that leaves us with the rest of the sword. So now I'm gonna hide all these elements that we already exported. And I just see that the sphere, I forgot to delete the cloned version that I have there. So let me just select the one here and delete it. Remember, the other one is just hidden, so it's still there. Now I'm pressing Alt on these teeth and also hide it. And that leaves us here with only the snake hat at that part. And now I also want to hide these horns and also here these rings. Remember, press Alt on these objects and then just that eye symbol. And also here the leather band. I want to hide that. And now let's see what we're left with. This is essentially the rest of the sword that we haven't made as a ZBrush version yet. So now what I want to do is make a new tool for that. I'm going to say merge visible so that it will pop up there as a new tool. Don't worry, we can always jump back to our current tool here. So let's click on that. Merge extract is the name of it. As you can see, we can jump around here. The other one has the subtools and this one here has it all merged together. But it still consists out of different elements here, as you can see. These colors indicate that when we go to polyframe view. So now what I want to do is go over here to polygroups and make that all one. So I'm going to say group visible, which means that ZBrush recognizes it all as one element here once we are using Dynamesh on it. So I'm gonna put the Dynamesh resolution up to 3000 and then confirm it by pressing the Dynamesh button. So now it might take a while to compute, even though usually it goes pretty fast, and you can see how everything here is now merged together. Just to demonstrate it there with a smooth brush. And now that means we can have this all here as one object when we use ZBrush. I'm actually gonna go over here to the subtools and make a duplicate. And then before I'm gonna use ZBrush, I wanna go down to where it says deformation on the right side. Let's open the deformation tab and I'm gonna have it here polish by features all the way up to 100. Let me take that into isolation view here so we see actually how it affects it. You can see how that blurs everything a bit. And I'm gonna do the same thing here just with polish crisp edges. So now we have a pretty much blurred mesh here. I'm gonna activate symmetry, X and Y, make sure it's on. And I'm gonna individually smooth out some of these parts where I think ZBrush might run into some problems. So I'm gonna do that by hand. Also here it looks a bit sharp. These are the areas where ZBrush might have some trouble with. So in order to make it easier for ZBrush, I'm just gonna smooth it by hand here with our smooth brush. Let's also take a look here at this ring here on the top. Smooth that out a bit so that we don't have these ultra harsh edges there. ZBrush likes it when it's smooth in general. At least that's my observation. And let's see where else we might want to do some smoothing here at the back. Let's see here at the blade part. I'm gonna smooth out these tiny details there. And let me go in here. Oops, let me undo that. Smooth that out a bit here. Our C sub information that we have there. And also here. I don't think it makes a big difference, but it can help ZBrush to produce a better result. So now let's test it here with polygon count 1, activate keep creases, and press the Z remeasure button. Make sure to have symmetry on as well as local symmetry. So this takes a while to calculate, and then let's see what ZBrush made out of it. And overall that looks pretty good. I mean, the blade part looks quite messed up, so we're gonna have some work to do in 3D Max to optimize that. But overall it's quite impressive what ZBrush made out of that. Let's just go over here to subtools to compare it with the other mesh. And yeah, it's wrapping around all these parts pretty nicely. Like I said, we still have quite a bit of work to do in 3D Max to optimize that, collapse edges, clean up some stuff. It's by no means perfect, but it is an enormous head start and we don't have to do all that from scratch. So with that selection active here, let's go over to export, and I'm gonna call it sword_main_low and export it. So now we have pretty much all the low poly parts exported, and we can then delete these subtools that we created here. Delete. And then let's go back here to our original tool that has all the subtools. I'm gonna press Shift on these eyeballs here so that we have everything visible again. It looks like this leather band is somehow two leather bands, but that's just a graphical illusion here. Not sure why that is that way. The polyframe view is sometimes a little buggy. I noticed that before. Either way, now what we have to do is export our high poly. I'm gonna select this leather band, and before we export it, I want to show you something completely random here, which is that we can also use different materials here. I usually just have this white material applied, but in case you ever want to have a look at your things in a different material, you can change it here. But yeah, I like to have this madcap white material, which I think is the best. So now that we have the complete sword visible, I'm gonna hit that merge visible button. And that creates a new tool once again here. So let's select it. And essentially what it did was that it merged everything here together. But if we hit the polyframe view, you can see how this is still individual subtools. It just merges it together. And that is perfect for what we want to do next, which is we want to create a high poly out of it. I mean, it already is a high poly. It has 20 million polys. And that is too much for 3D Max to handle. So what we're going to do is use the so-called decimation master to bring that poly count down in order for us to be able to work with it. Let's open up the decimation master here. I'm actually going to unplug that whole window so that we have it here on the left side. And now I want to go over here to where it says decimate, and I'm going to put it to 15% of our total poly count. And then use the pre-process all button, and I'm going to cut out the part where this is loading. This takes quite a while otherwise. It's analyzing the mesh and then it takes quite a while, and I cut that part out here. So now it's pre-processed. You have to do that, and now we can hit the actual decimate all button. So let's see what it does. We have 20 million polys, and now that we decimate it, it also loads a bit. But that usually goes pretty fast then. I'm not gonna cut that out, just so that you see what's happening. So it's loading. And now if you look here at the bottom, we brought it down quite significantly. And that is a poly count that we can work with in 3D Max. So let's take a look here in our polyframe view what it did. And you can see that it just retopologizes this thing and gets rid of a ton of edges, but leaves them where it's necessary. So we still have all the details. Let's export that, sword_high. This might also take a moment to load. And essentially that completes the ZBrush part of the tutorial. We're going to create the low poly model in 3D Max as the next thing. See you there.